I moved to Moscow in January of 1995, which was about 3.5 years post-communism. There was still a deficit of most products. It still looked as gloomy as we would see in pictures and stuff. I think by the time I got there was one grocery store you'd consider setting foot in. There's maybe 2 restaurants where you would actually enjoy the food.
Hey guys, if you have any interest in working outside the US, then you will be riveted by this next episode. I had a longtime family friend of mine, Albin Gielicz, join me on the podcast, and he walks us through his experience working in London and subsequent to that in Moscow for several years. And this was just after the fall of communism in Russia and Eastern Europe. So he has amazing experiences from that time, and then coming back to the US, getting started in the cosmetics industry of all things. And he describes his time for well over a decade working in that industry and has amazing wisdom that he's accumulated over the years, and he shares that with us. So I think that you'll find it absolutely fascinating. Here's Albin. Enjoy the podcast. You have actually a very interesting background because you've worked and you worked pretty early in your career abroad. And I think that was actually shortly after you graduated, if I'm not mistaken.
It was immediately after.
So and that's something that is, even these days, fairly unique. So maybe you could start there. Like, how did you end up working outside the US?
So after graduating college, kind of the trend was at that age and our part of the country was to go back home and move into Chicago and hang out with your friends and spend your 20s doing that. Well, I knew much earlier on, that I was never going to do that. The goal was always to move to Los Angeles because this is where I knew I would find my forever home. However, when I graduated college, I didn't have any money and I didn't have a car, and therefore, what do I do next? So, and you kind of have to have a car when you come to LA, despite what people say. So a couple of my fraternity brothers were moving to London for a semester abroad, and they invited me to come along. They had an extra, bed in the apartment. They're like, hey, this is what you'll owe for rent. It seemed to work, whatever. So I find an exchange program for students between the United Kingdom and the United States, and I was able to purchase a 6-month work permit. So when I arrived in the UK, I would be legal to work. Of course, it was up to me to then find a job. So I do that. I have a place to live. I have a work permit. I'm legal. Now it's pound the pavement and find the job. So I went to the program's office. I have a big job board. Back in those days, nothing was digital. So it literally was a bulletin board with a bunch of tacks and papers hanging off of it, and combed through that, found a job that suited me, where I thought it sounded interesting, went and applied, and I got it. So at least I had my rent covered. Then one thing led to another, and I found another job. So basically for those 6 months, I had 2 part-time jobs, lived in central London, and kind of had my first big city worldly experience there. The comfort of 2 friends from home, living in a nice neighborhood, but definitely not in Kansas anymore, as they say, right? And certainly not in Arlington Heights, Illinois anymore. That then, but the clock was ticking. I have 6 months to play around. I was a model during the day. I waited tables at night. Certainly nothing that made my father proud and pleased to spend, money on 4 years of college for a marketing and Russian degree, both of which I was not using. And literally I was at a get together on a Friday or Saturday night. It was kind of bored and it wasn't that exciting. And someone earlier in the week had said, if you're looking for a job, why don't you look in the phone book? And I was eager to use my Russian. I was kind of interested in going back there. I had visited a year and a half before, and that was kind of what I had basically been planning to do, or grooming myself to do since I was 14 years old. So fast forward to 22, now is the time. So I literally pick up this phone book. I tear out the R page where it had Russia listings, bring it home and started looking at them. And I found one that was nearby. So I walk over to that office, drop off my resume. And by the time I got home, I had this lengthy voice message, in our recording machine. Of course, no one had cell phones then, in Russian, saying, I had to listen to it like 20 times. And they basically invited me in for an interview. And longer to prevent this story from getting longer, I ended up getting my first big boy job that sent me to Moscow in January of 1995 from this company in London, which was a project base, which was their headquarters for a project that had received $5 million of investment to go to Moscow and start a life insurance company. And they just so happened to be looking for a marketing person who spoke Russian.
And how good was your Russian at the time? Were you fluent?
No, it was textbook. I knew grammar and I had a decent vocabulary, but it was all textbook. And it had been almost a year and a half to 2 years since I really actively spoke it, because I kind of placed out of my double major early. I entered college with a very solid foundation in the language, and I kind of, the college wasn't challenging enough, quite honestly. I learned more in high school than I did in university. So I was rusty. This job came with a, room and board. So they placed me with a Russian family in the center of Moscow. And that's where I really learned the language and became conversational and more fluent. So that was very necessary to immerse myself that way in order to, add value.
Yeah, totally. And how old were you at this time when you moved to Moscow?
I had just turned 23.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
all right. So
I had a grandmother and a mom and a dad and a little sister and a dog. And that's how I spent my 20s. Probably not ideal. Certain things didn't happen because that was my living situation. But nonetheless, it was what it was. And it was very enjoyable. And it lasted 5 years. So clearly it was the right thing for me to be doing. Now, that job didn't last 5 years. It was a 2-year contract. But once there, you make connections, you make friends, you see what else is going on. And, I thought life insurance was kind of boring. It was more of a stepping stone. So I kind of switched gears, stayed with marketing, but obviously then worked for advertising agencies that were working with big brands like Pepsi and Gillette and Coca-Cola and Mars and, all the big consumer good companies that were, trying to carve out some market share in the Russian market, because all this stuff was new at that time.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you add a little context for people listening or watching? What was going on politically at that time?
A lot of stuff. So I moved to Moscow to become a resident in January of 1995, which was about 3.5 years post-communism. So it still felt very communist. In that, I mean, there was still a deficit of most products. It still looked as gloomy as we would see in pictures and stuff. But they didn't have the creature comforts from the West. I think by the time I got there was one grocery store you'd consider setting foot in. There's maybe 2 restaurants where you would actually enjoy the food. One day I wanted to buy my grandmother a broom because the one she was using was ridiculous. And it took me 3 weeks to find one. So yeah, and they just didn't have everything. So it was roughing it. It was considered a hardship post. And so as an expat, you get paid extra for that. And you're allowed to leave once a month to go wherever you want to kind of get back to yourself and relax. And so there were a lot of perks to this job too, to be 23 and be able to fly all over Europe once a month. I mean, who wouldn't want to do this, right? So yeah, there was a lot of appeal. And then again, there were a lot of young, single, native English speakers from the US, the UK, Australia, Canada, you name it. And we were all there kind of in the same boat and keeping ourselves sane and having fun and doing what we would try and do, back here. Right. So every time, the 4th of July would come around, it was the 4th of July. It was a big deal. And we went all out and rented a, field and had fireworks and did all that stuff. Or Halloween was a big deal and that sort of thing.
Was there a common thread among all these other people in terms of like their personality or their drive or what their goals were? Or was it kind of just like a hodgepodge of people? It was kind of a hodgepodge, but there were some where they were common. So like, at one point in my 5 years living there were 8 people from my high school because our Russian program was so good and so effective. Oh, wow. Okay.
In fact, within my 4-year period, there were a few from older classmates, a few younger classmates, but 8 of us ended up going there in the 90s because of what we learned in Mount Prospect, Illinois in the early 80s or late 80s. And then there were others like that too, who studied Russian in high school or college or came from Russian backgrounds. Families had immigrated to other countries much earlier and they go back because they have the language skills. There were others who were just there like gold diggers and they saw what was about to happen with the privatization of all the state-owned companies and they knew exactly what to do to make a ton of money, which I had been at camp too. But So it varied. And then there were people who showed up, didn't speak a word of Russian. And 5 years later, when I left, still didn't speak a word of Russian. And
Oh,
they didn't
wow.
really care. They got by the way they did. And they were there purely for business reasons or, sometimes, as comfortable as Western countries can be, for some, that's a little boring. They need the challenges. They need to wrestle with the fax machine all day to get it to go through. I don't know why, but there are people like that. So, and then the longer you stay there, it becomes home and maybe you get married and have kids and that really becomes your life. And then you realize you can't function when you go home. Like that's the only place you can function. It's such a special, unique place that when you come back to, let's say, an easier country, you kind of freak out. And I do know people like that who stay there 20 plus years and like, I don't think I can live anywhere else now.
Wow. Interesting.
I made sure that wouldn't happen to me for sure.
So, okay. So you were in Moscow for 5 years working different jobs.
Different marketing jobs, but
Marketing.
primarily advertising.
And you decided to leave.
Mm-hmm. Decided to leave. I was on my third or fourth round of friends because it was a very transient place. People would come for a year or two contract and get out. I mean, no one really wanted to make that their life. A few of my buddies did, but most of them were like, this is a point in time, cool experience, but I've had enough and I'm leaving. So I decided that was my turn as well. And I wanted to come back and get my MBA. So that was kind of what drove me back.
Okay. Okay. All right. So you come back to the States, you get your MBA and then what?
And then I moved to California finally and slept on my brother's couch in Santa Monica for a while. Looking to stay in marketing. Obviously I have the language skills, but wanted to do international marketing for one of the studios here in LA and got my first post MBA job at MGM Home Entertainment when they were still located here in Santa Monica and was in the operational side. So it was the right company, but the wrong department and kind of the wrong division of the company. Great people.
Here because you just wanted your foot in the door at the time or?
Yeah, I figured if I'm in MGM in operations, that would be easier to switch to marketing, let's say, than it would if I was just submitting a resume. And I tried that a few times and it didn't really work. So, and then I have the looming obligation of paying off my business school debts, staring me in the face. And around the same time that needed to start happening, I get a call from Mary Kay Cosmetics in Dallas, Texas, who were looking for a fluent Russian speaker and somebody who was comfortable going back to those countries and spending time there and working there and not permanently, and they dangled a lot more money in front of me. So I talked to my father, who well. Certainly he's the type to follow the money versus the quality of life or one's dreams or what one really wants to do where they see themselves. So kicking and screaming, I moved to Dallas, Texas to work for Mary Kay. And I lasted about 2.5 years. I knew from the moment I set off the plane, this was not going to be a long-term thing.
Yeah, but it was a stepping stone, right?
It was. And it's that, that now, maybe this comes off somewhat bitter, and this is probably interesting for your listeners, because don't make these mistakes. A stepping stone to what? A career in cosmetics?
Well, could be if
there's such a thing as an old boys club. There's an old girls club too, and the cosmetics industry is definitely that. And if you're not one to be welcomed into the sorority, you stay at your level, you last your time, and that's it.
How soon did you figure that out? It wasn't right when you stepped off the plane, right?
No, it wasn't. And great. I'm grateful for the experiences I had. I quit my job without a job to come to. I moved back to Santa Monica, living with my brother. I'd saved up enough money, so I wasn't on the couch anymore. But I just presented kind of the downside of it, but the upside of it was through a contact at Mary Kay, I met my next boss who worked at Murat. And she and I have similar backgrounds, about the same age, both from suburban Chicago, got along like a house on fire. And I ended up working there for 9 years.
Wow.
So while that may have not been the subject matter of my choice originally and something I thought I was really cut out for, it was a positive experience and kept me there that long. I didn't really advance as much as I would have wanted to. So that's where I started to realize the whole, sorority thing, or lack of a better term, was kind of real. And it was probably a mistake to stay that long. That's where I threw myself into other things in my free time. I got very involved in my community. And I guess I probably got complacent at work because these other things were more important. So the paycheck helped sustain the life I wanted outside of work, which most people's paychecks do. But I probably didn't pay as much attention to that as I should have because I was busy with other things that I guess filled my soul more than my day job.
Right.
And we'll get to that. We'll get to how that paid off at the end, I promise. So that job comes to an end. Then by that point in my life,
after 9 years, that's a long.
Yeah. And incidentally, I was there 5 years and I left to go to another company, also cosmetics, and did not like it at all. Lasted 6 months, quit, and Murad took me back for another 4.
I see. Okay.
Murad is a great place. Dr. Murad and the Murad family are wonderful people. I am very grateful to have spent the time I did there. But did that prepare me for a future in cosmetics until I retire? No, it didn't. But I changed too. I got more into fitness and really absorbed the LA lifestyle and being outdoors and our warm, beautiful weather and all that. So after Murad ended, I was looking for something in fitness, and I became the marketing director of YogaWorks. Not something I practice personally, but a practice I do respect. Mm-hmm. So I got to learn more about that. And then that lasted about a year plus until a former colleague from Murad calls me to go back into cosmetics in an international role. And I did. Money was better. The travel experiences were coming back to me. The downside was it was 60 miles away in Ventura. But in the beginning, I only had to go in 3 days a week. And then, of course, that changed to 4 and whatever. So went back to that. And the first 2 years of that job were wonderful. Great people, loved my boss. The travel experiences were wonderful. Had, really cool network of international distributors I got to go visit, and the products I could stand behind. I mean, again, target market are women, but there were it wasn't color cosmetics. It was something anybody could use. And, then that kind of changed when some executive team changed. They were trying to changing rules and regulations within the company. And then the pandemic hits. I lasted about a year working from home. Then they want me to come back. I'm like, do I have to? We just had a great year. And I've had the past year experiencing 3 extra hours of my day that I'm not driving.
Yep.
And we agreed to, mutually part ways about 2.5 years ago. Mm-hmm. And while I was, not terribly disappointed to not be going back there, that the paycheck was nice. And when that stops, it kind of makes you reevaluate everything in your life and what comes next. And that's where, I was 49 years old at the time. So I'm pushing 50, like kind of on my way to hit my second midlife crisis. And this one was better than the first, actually, because it forced me in that whole predicament and some other changes in my life around that time, forced me to really think out of the box, push myself out of a comfort zone, take other people's advice that I may have just kind of, shrugged my shoulders and laughed at, thinking, no, that sounds fun, but that's definitely not for me type of thing, and try it all. And while even today, I'm not back up to the salary level I would like, I'm certainly having a lot more fun. I have more free time. I am more flexible and willing to just kind of go for it if someone tosses an idea my way. And, I have now 25, pushing 30 years experience to draw on when needed.
So now you're working for yourself. You're a consultant.
Yes, you could say that. Yeah. Okay. So, and then again, trying to bring this full circle, in that time, since 2007, when I returned to Santa Monica from Dallas, I've thrown myself heavily into my community, been on various boards and commissions. And, I mean, it's kind of up to my ears in things, Santa Monica, which led to me running for city council last year in 2022. Didn't really have a full-time job. Running for anything requires a ton of time. So it was a blessing almost that I didn't have a job and a boss and all that, so I could get out there and really give it a go. I did. It was an interesting experience. I learned a lot. I didn't win, but I also, in my heart of hearts, probably didn't expect to. I entered late. I didn't raise enough money. I kind of fumbled through some of it. Next time I'll be smarter. But an indirect result of doing that was I raised my profile. I met new people. I got involved in other things, and then I get offered a job after that. So what started in, let's say, July of 2022 resulted in me becoming, I guess, a consultant on retainer by February of 2023. And, which is what I'm still doing, which is what keeps me here now. And, once this project I'm working on fully kicks off, it's likely to morph into a full-time job.
Mm.
Doing, probably until I don't do it. So, and that's been wonderful. That this is the first time, I guess, in all my years being out there, I've been hired to be me, to do stuff I'm good at, and that comes naturally, and that I technically have been doing for free for almost 20 years. Because I volunteer, and that's my nature. So that feels good. And I think the moral of that story is, if you know you're good at something, if you will do the job for free, that's what you should be doing.
Oh, that's fascinating.
I would have never done a cosmetics job for free, or sit in an office all day and do that. Some people might, and if that's your calling, go do it, because that's the right thing for you. I've learned enough about myself over the years to know I need to be out talking to people. I need to be up and walking around. I need to be outside. So what is that? Maybe I should have been a landscape architect or something. And really, or something that use my hands and not stare at screens and type all day.
So
of course, this age, you can't get away from doing that sometimes.
Right.
But like in these computer programmers, which I know is a great job and very needed, and it's probably the heart of our tech industry and our futures, but I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they physically sit there and do that. God love them for it, but I guess that's not what I've been cut out for.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So when you look back, you think that or maybe you would say that you absolutely know with 100% certainty that you would have taken a different path. If you knew then what you know now after 2.5 decades of working and navigating corporate life, that sort of thing.
And I will say, though, and this is a big topic now with college debt, having debt stare you in the face is really scary, and it prevents certain decisions from being made. Like, I couldn't go out and take risks because I had to pay X amount, 100,000.
And how do you avoid that, though? How do you avoid it?
I don't know. I have friends who do, rich parents, scholarships,
most
whatever.
People don't have rich parents, and most people don't get at least scholarships in an amount that would eliminate, let's say, even half of your tuition.
Yeah, I really don't have the answer. Here I'm 21 years out of business school, and I'm still paying that loan off. So, and that really is not what's intended when you take that. You're meant to soar and get to higher salary levels where it's like, here's 20 grand I owe, now we're done. Well, that never happened. So I feel for anybody, coming out of college at 22 and looking at a couple $100,000. I don't know how that works.
Yeah.
I have not succeeded at that, but I will say, though, chipping away at that will be a lot easier and more rewarding if you're doing something you like to earn the money to pay for that. So if there is a way, if you have to start in something that you're not in love with, they say it's easier to find a job when you have one. Be looking for that next thing, and don't get complacent. Don't stay there 9 years, and really try and move into what else it is you like. And the thing is, a lot of stuff, like, I'm also at a point in life too, even with this job I currently have, I'm doing other stuff, and I don't see myself doing one thing anymore. I found several things I like, and not all of them are every day, but that's what makes it possible then, right? You work a 40-hour week. Who really works 40 hours? Some people do. Some people work even more than that. But let's face it, if you have something else, you can either carve out an hour here or there to do something. You can make that happen. Right. And so a lot of my other things are like that. An hour here, an hour there, maybe after hours, maybe after 5 or 6 o'clock, you have a later meeting, whatever it is, so I wouldn't say no to things you like. You figure out how to squeeze them in.
Yeah.
If that helps pay the bills. If it stresses you out, then don't do it. But
right. So would you say that it's kind of rare for the value of a graduate degree, let's say, like the value of that degree it's not realized when you look at the cost to get that graduate degree. So I'm not talking about undergrad, which look, at the end of the day, there are cheaper ways to get, significantly cheaper ways to get an undergrad degree. You can go to community college for the first 2 years, then you could transfer to a four-year school, and it could be in-state, public, and you are limiting the amount of debt that you incur. But for grad school, I feel like, especially in our society, and depending on the profession, but whether it's engineering, business, even computer science, marketing, whatever, it is, you almost feel like you're at a disadvantage if you don't have an MBA, or you don't, whatever the graduate degree is.
Yeah.
But is that perception reality? At least based on your experience in your area.
I didn't do it a different way, so I can't say, like, would Mary Kay not have hired me if I didn't have an MBA? For that particular job, I think they would have, because they were looking for somebody who spoke Russian and knew marketing.
Yeah.
But that's not to say, like, it's a confidence boost. It may put you above others. I think it does depend where you get the MBA from. I didn't go to Harvard, so that doors didn't fly open like they probably would for somebody who did.
Yeah.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one. It's, there's definitely an opportunity cost. And I think if you're in a career and it's going well, I don't know why I would interrupt that. And you like what you're doing and you see growth, why would you interrupt that for, an expensive MBA? I mean, if you want to do it part-time and figure out how to pay for it and all that, fine. But, to stop cold turkey and jump into a full-time program, so you're not making any money, you have living expenses, you have the school to pay for, that becomes really daunting to recover after that.
Yeah. So
I don't regret learning more. So I'm never going to say I wish I didn't do it, because I did learn more. And let's face it, MBAs and graduate programs they're a lot for the networking too, and who else you meet in these programs, and the experiences you get beyond the classroom. So I think there's a lot of value in that, and that you can't really get other places. I mean, you can always network in different environments, but when you're in the trenches with somebody, with a team and coworkers or fellow students, whatever, for 2 years, you really get to know each other.
Yeah.
And then college number 2, and you have lifelong friends and all that good stuff. So, it becomes kind of who you are at that point. But if someone's really looking at their life's expenses and how much money they want to accumulate by the time they die, well, MBA might inhibit those goals.
Yeah. So in all of the situations that you've been successful, what do you think are the characteristics that propelled you to that success?
I'm nice.
You're nice. You are nice, Albin.
I don't burn bridges. I don't disrespect people. I don't write nasty emails and I, or leave a paper trail of that. I mean, I everyone gets in a mood and wants to tell somebody off, but, make sure you calm down before you actually do that, especially if you're in an industry like cosmetics, where if I were to stay in that, I don't know who could end up being my boss. 3 companies from now, somebody I worked with at the first job and we didn't get along, and suddenly, now they're the ones who decide whether or not I get hired.
Yeah.
That it's just not worth it. On the other hand, when sometimes being too nice can prevent you from, sometimes nice guys finish last too. So I also have identified some places in my life where maybe that contributed to not being further along by now.
Yeah. But I mean, to your point, that doesn't mean that you have to be mean. It's just that maybe, right. I mean, how would you describe it? If you're not, let's say, progressing to where you want to get to, or maybe you have a manager, or there are, peers, coworkers that you have to work with that are, let's say, abrasive in their personality. Just being nice and respectful to them may not work. And it's not to say that you have to be the inverse of that, but what are some of the other strategies that you've employed?
Well, part of it, again, it depends on the nature. Every company has politics, even if it's just 2 people, right? So you get to bigger ones, and then there's a lot more. And there is a game to be played. And if you're not on board with that, like, you do your job and you put in your time and you're not making mistakes or whatever, that's one thing. But then, but are you really in with them? Like, do you sit and gossip? Do you, I don't know. There were a lot of behaviors I've noticed along the way that just aren't me. And because I didn't participate in that or fully swallow the Kool-Aid, I was kind of left out. I don't know if they thought just, I was judging them because they were being nasty about somebody and I'm not, or whatever it was. I wasn't really kind of in the in crowd because I didn't really like the behavior of the in crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Like in high school, if someone was doing drugs or smoking, I'm not hanging around that. It's not me. So that doesn't go away with people. That's human nature. It turns up throughout your entire life, takes on different shapes and forms, but it's there. And in these cases, I feel like I was on the outs because I wasn't, on the in.
Yeah, and you can't really avoid that in many cases. You can you only control your own behavior, right? Your own work product, your productivity, et cetera. And if that's going to be the situation that you find yourself in, unbeknownst to you when you're interviewing for the position, then it's probably not the right place for you, right?
Right. And then you don't always know who likes you, who doesn't. So you have to watch what you say. I mean, there were instances, certainly in Mary Kay, where things would come back months later, like, I heard you said this. I'm like, what? And I don't remember it. And then they explain it. And maybe part of it was true or familiar, but it was taken way out of context.
That's interesting. And why do you think it was taken out of context?
Because they didn't know me. Like, one incident I'm thinking of, it was, I was being myself and saying I would do this. And then months later, it's like, well, it came across as you would do this to butter up to the boss so you could get promoted. Like, what? Okay. I mean, and I'll spare you the boring details of what that was, but it was just so ridiculous. And I started laughing. Like, okay, but things like that. So you have to be, you don't know who's watching. I mean, some of these companies almost feel like they have secret police, and so someone will go and then tell the boss, so-and-so did this at the meeting, and and it comes back to you. And that's why I would never put anything controversial in writing. Like, watch what you say in emails.
And it's not limited to emails, right? Messaging, apps, texting.
Anything where there's proof, or that you might say something and it's taken in a different way. I mean, you can't express tone in writing as much. So you might think you're being okay, blah, blah, blah. And then someone's totally offended because they think you meant it in a nastier way or something, whatever. I would say if you have an issue with somebody, deal with it in person.
Totally. Yeah, I agree with that. 100%. When you look back at your career, what are some of the mistakes, some of the bigger mistakes that you've made that you would tell or instruct your younger self to avoid?
Yeah. Don't stay somewhere too long. I mean, see the writing on the wall. If you're a manager for a couple of years, you're not, and other people become senior manager or director, you're probably not going to get it. So if you're not doing what you want to do, if you're using something as a stepping stone to pay the bills, all right, well, figure out what it is you do like earlier on if you can. That can help you pay the bills. Maybe it's volunteering at something to test the waters or whatever. But if you're sure, go for it. If you're not sure, then try and figure it out earlier, because it just makes the rest of your work life more enjoyable. Say the money will come, and I tend to believe that. It hasn't come in the way I would have liked so far, but it hasn't not come per se. So I do think there's some truth in that, and you just have to find the right fit for yourself and know your interests, know what you're good at, know what you don't like, for sure.
And so a lot of listeners are going to be college students or maybe recent grads, people really early in their career as well. What are some common mistakes that you may not have made, but you've observed others make, that you would advise people listening or watching?
I think one thing, I guess I've kind of done it too in a smaller scale, and certainly seen it in others, is so you get your first job, you're all educated from a great school or, grad school, undergrad, whatever it is, and they're hiring you because you're so awesome and you're going to go in and fix everything. And then in your first week, you're like, what do we do this? Why try that? And why are you doing that? I mean, keep in mind, you're talking to people who've been there a lot longer. Things are the way they are for a reason. It might not be right, but it got there somehow. So you kind of have to just shut up and listen and observe before, and kind of get people to like you and trust you before you start suggesting change and correcting things and all that. And there's usually 101 reasons why something is the way it is. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them are really out there and crazy. And it's like, why are 12 inches in a foot? Probably because an English king hundreds of years ago's foot was that big. Well, in family companies and in smaller companies, that type of reasoning still happens. It is this way because the boss said so. That's it. Mm-hmm. No more, no less. And so if you start to question that and make fun of it or be like, too weirded out by it, well, it could come back and haunt you because the person who started the company, said it needed to be that way.
But it's kind of a balancing act too, right? You don't want to, yes, you want to be a sponge. And I think that actually applies to somebody not just starting their first job, but starting any job in their career, because they're at a new company and they have to absorb information. They have to observe how people interact with each other, sort of get a lay of the land. But you also, even in your first job, you don't want to stay silent for too long. So,
no.
Right, it is kind of a balancing act in that sense.
You figure out when the time is right. You find somebody there who maybe feels the same way, or you get chummier with your boss and be like, "Hey, I noticed this. It seems like I have some ideas on how to improve it." Be gentle with it. Watch your language. Like, not this sucks. This is all wrong. Who did this? More like, "Hey, I've been working on this, and when I was in school, we did a project and we tried something similar, and we did it a different way." You could just let it be known that, because that's what's drive your career and move you forward. I mean, very few people hire somebody to be a yes man.
Right.
I mean, there are people who do, so you have to watch out for that. But others bring the fresh ideas, bring what the future is. And keep in mind too, that a lot of people are really resistant to change, especially the older you get, the harder that becomes. So if you're in an older established company, a big behemoth company, which we have plenty in this country, you're going to see a lot of that. Someone who's been there 20 or 30 years and is pushing retirement, they're not interested in changing anything or big stuff. They're not interested in more work.
Right.
And change usually means more work.
Interesting.
Learning and skill. So I think you have to really know who's involved and approach it in the right way. I mean, if you feel passionate about it and you're there for a reason, they hired you because you're good at that sort of thing. You don't be silent about it, but know that Rome wasn't built in a day, and you're not going to incorporate new processes and procedures into a company in a day either. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah. And so coming out of college, undergrad, let's say, what are some of the skills that you think would benefit people the most to possess? Because, I mean, let's face it, in undergrad, you accumulate knowledge, but not much of that, unless maybe you're studying engineering or computer science. And even then, this may not, what you learn in undergrad may not be entirely transferable or applicable in the real world when you start working. But what are some of the skills that you think would be most beneficial for somebody who's just starting out in their career to possess? It could be soft skills, hard skills, a combination of both.
Well, in terms of soft skills, I mean, writing, since everything's in writing now, email, texting, WhatsApp, you name it. And I don't mean with the cute little abbreviations and partial words and misspellings. I mean proper writing, and with etiquette. When you're in the business world, that should always be where you go to. And if you become more comfortable with people and you can bring in your more casual way of doing things, then fine. But at least in the beginning, proper writing, knowing how to interact with people in person. That's falling to the wayside because everyone's in their screens and using apps to meet and do this and that. Well, nothing is a substitute for an in-person interaction.
Yeah.
Go out to lunch, get to know your colleagues. I mean, you're going to spend a huge chunk of your life, your day, your hours of the week, your waking hours with these people. I mean, find a friend or two, or at least try and enjoy it somehow and bond. It makes the job so much easier. And you actually end up getting more done, and you enjoy, and the time flies by quicker, and all that good stuff that comes along with it. In terms of harder skills, people graduating, and I think this just kind of comes naturally, but knowing technology, knowing how to get into these apps and post a TikTok video and use social media. If you're in the marketing or publicity world at all, you have to know that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm an old dog who's been taught that new trick over the past few years, and I now consult businesses on it, and I taught a class about it, and it really is a thing, whether we like it or not. It's here, and it can be damaging, but it can be very beneficial. So, and it can make you money. It's cheap advertising, whatever, however you want to look at it and use it, but it's not going away. So you need to know Instagram, you need to know TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn is more the professional one, but these big ones, Twitter, probably for your regular communications. That's really a thing.
Yeah. What about, as you were talking, I was thinking one skill, probably a soft skill. Actually, I'm not sure where this would land. It's kind of like it's right on the cusp of a hard skill, and that is the art of negotiating, because you're constantly negotiating with people, right? You're negotiating to get certain terms of your own employment, right? You're negotiating with other people to include a certain feature, let's say in a product or a service that's being built or marketed at that time, and I suspect that there is not a class in undergrad, in most undergrad programs, the art of negotiating. I had it in law school, and it probably is in a topic covered in MBA programs, but not at the undergrad level, I don't think. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, life is a negotiation.
Yes.
Some easier than others. You're married, you have a partner, whatever, negotiating about everything in that situation. So, and the thing is too, in business, like everybody wants to win. If you're in a competitive environment, so how do you make it so everybody does win?
Yeah.
Or gets a piece of what they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
You buy a used car. I want 10,000. Okay, I'll offer you 8. Great, we'll settle on 9. That's a very basic one, but that's life.
Yeah.
Some countries are bolder about it. You go to other parts of the world. I mean, buying an apple is a negotiation. At an open market in some places. Here not so much, and I think we get lazier about that because we don't haggle prices on a daily basis when we're shopping for food. But in other parts of the world, they do. And as a result, a lot of those people are much better at business because they apply that to everything.
Yeah, definitely. That's funny.
So I think you need to be bold about it. And I would also bring in your own creativity too. I mean, we live in a very creative time where new things are popping up where you never would have thought that could have happened. And here it is. I mean, driverless cars go up and down my street all the time now. So, and Coco is delivering your food in a little robot, up and down my sidewalk. So like someone thought of that and like it probably got laughed at and then now is brought to life and it's part of everyday life. So I wouldn't hold back on that. And if you're in an environment that doesn't value that, do it on the side. Write down your own, start a side project. Don't just because you are employed and you work 8 hours or 40 hours a week or whatever it is, there's still a lot more life out there. Mm-hmm. And I think that's complacency it can be comfortable, but then it also can be your enemy too. And you don't want to be too complacent ever. And discomfort and disruption is actually a good thing sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Last question for you. Would you encourage graduates to seek employment abroad? Is that something you worked for several years outside of the country. Do you think that was one of the periods in your career, in your life, where you grew the most?
Yes. I mean, especially that time. I think we're still growing up in our 20s. So that was then. I will say, though, at the time I was there, there's an opportunity cost for everything. So while I was there, having a unique experience, having fun, making better money than I would have made back here, whatever, I missed the tech boom. I missed the internet. Right. So I can't come back and what's going on? What are these companies? Yeah, of course you hear about it around the world, but it's not part of your everyday as much. So while, I wouldn't trade that experience, I'm very glad I did it. It makes me who I am. Make sure that you can, when you come back from that experience, you're integrating back at the same level or higher.
Interesting. Okay.
However you can do that. And I think probably the better way or easier way would be like have a job here that sends you overseas. So you're working for a big multinational company and that opportunity comes up and you toss your hat in the ring and they choose you.
Mm-hmm.
That's one way. I mean, you're at the, the mercy of somebody else making that decision for you versus just showing up in a country you want to live in. Hopefully you speak the language and here I am, what can I do? That's more the adventurous way of doing it. And you'll learn it and you'll have great stories to tell your kids and grandkids someday. Is that the most lucrative? Is that going to help pay off some loans? Maybe, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
It really is going to depend on your comfort level with risk.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, I do encourage people to undertake more risk than they're typically comfortable with, especially at a young age. You have less to lose.
Yeah, you do. I mean, you're going to wake up married with kids someday, and then you're not moving to another country to do that for sure.
Yeah.
No, I would try it. I mean, what's the worst case? You go for a year, you try and figure things out. It doesn't work. You come home,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or you go there and it becomes, changes your life forever in many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So you never know until you try it. Yeah. And again, it seeing the rest of the world, getting out of our bubbles is probably the most valuable thing we can do.
Yeah.
It creates understanding. It ideally, hopefully prevents wars. and we're getting smaller and smaller as everything comes together with technology and everything that, you can't not do that.
Yeah, no, totally. All right. And where can people find you?
Well, it's multiple places, I guess. You can email me at samoalbin, SAMOALBIN @gmail.com, or you can hit me up on Instagram at samoalbin also, but it's SAMO_Albin, ALBIN.
Awesome.
My two favorite places to go. Yeah. Two places I hang out the most.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Albin. This was great.
All right.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Office IQ. If you're looking for ways to accelerate your path to success, you can find more resources like this on our YouTube channel or at officeintelligence.com. We offer courses and other content that will literally change the direction of your career for the better. If there are any topics you'd like to hear more about or questions you'd like me to address on future episodes, you can send an email to jeff@officeintelligence.com.